So we were talking about mind and machines, and definitely one thing which is inevitable to happen is the merge of technology with humans, and this
Hmm.
whole technological evolution that we are going to go through. So how do you think
Hmm.
language is going to cope up with this technological evolution in the next 20, 30, 40 years? And I'm thinking in terms of maybe we don't need language at all. We are going to communicate with our brains itself, like telekinesis and
Hmm.
stuff like that, with Neuralink and everything coming on. So what is the language going to be like language of the brains or something like that? How are we going to speak to each other?
Yes. Or even better, how are we going to lie to each other? If we are
Yeah.
we are total. See, we were not born with transparent screens on our chests so that we could read each other's thoughts.
Hmm.
Nature designed us to have interiors which were not available to others. Mental interiors as well as physical interiors. And it strikes me as quite unusual that we go through a lifetime without actually having seen our gut or our stomachs or our lungs. We never
Yeah.
see that.
Yeah.
We assume that we have this mechanical interior which is functioning, but we've never seen it. So, one way in which we gauge other human beings is externally. Now, you think of all the consequences where we communicate only through sort of telekinesis or whatever you want to think about,
Yeah.
whatever word you want to use. What would we lose and gain? And in this, before I begin to give you my answer, one of the things I want to say is take writing. Do you agree it's a technology? Do you think writing is a technology, Sarthak?
Mm, in a way, yes.
In every way it is,
Okay.
because you'll see in early this was the early ways of communicating, drawing a picture
Yeah.
or something. Writing meaning proto writing as well, lines,
Mm-hmm.
dots, marks, arrows, etc. Okay. Now that's a technology, and written scripts are only 5,000 years, 6,000 years old. So one puzzle is language is maybe even goes back maybe 50, 60, 70, maybe a million years. But writing came very, very late. It's a very late form of symbolic thought. Now, the the reason why uh, we language is only one part of our symbolic apparatus, but one of the most important things we were designed for is not to allow our thoughts and expressions to be seen by everybody,
Mm.
because that would change the nature of community, that would change the nature of culture, that would change the nature of individual contact. So if everything is visible to everybody, how you have to begin the sense making processes, the culture making processes all over again. So is it going to be possible to repeat the entire cycle of evolution? And given the lesson of writing, that it's only 6,000 years old, but in 6,000 years old, it has not still reached the entire world's population. Writing has not. It's a
Yeah.
simple form of technology. It has not reached the world's population. Why has it not reached? Okay? It's because there are power hierarchies in language. You don't want to share goods and services. So how are you going to want, how are you going to deal with the problem of transparency? Because that was not how you were designed. So, what is it that you will be communicating when everything is already apparent?
Mm.
Are you still thinking of you in a human frame that you can hide what you want and you can keep what you want, because that is highly unlikely to happen in a mechanical universe. So if you're not going to be able to hide things, what is there to communicate? If you're not going to have privacy, What is there to communicate? Now,
Yeah.
these are deep ethical questions. So it's not just that you design machines which can communicate uh, remotely, or you start here and then through some process of portability, you reconstruct yourself somewhere else. That's all within imagination, and we can think about it. But so far, and that's why I think narrative is so important, because it's a conceptual device.
Mm.
We have not been able to do two things. One is the narratives that we have are still very anthropocentric. They are acting as if we remain as we are, but we have these complicated modes of communicating, right? The second thing that we have not been successful in designing is we have designed very good syntactic machines, recognition machines, face recognition machines,
Yeah.
even robots. We have not developed, we have no idea how to create a feeling machine, a machine that actually feels, not that can show anger, imitate anger, or any other emotion, but that feels it. And that is something we have not succeeded in having a paradigm for. So is external exhibitions of the emotions, this is like Searle's Chinese room experiment, the same as the internal feelings that we have. Would we say a machine because it shows the outward semblance of any emotion, hate, is actually a hating machine?
Yeah.
Or a loving machine? And we have no idea how to. So, this is a problem I raised 10 years ago and I'm working on. What would be the nature of a feeling machine? And when we try to imagine a feeling machine, we are not able to design it such that the machine feels. We feel.
Yeah.
So, you can, but for example, if you design a machine which moves, but which looks like a rat, versus a machine which moves slowly like a robot, and you ask a human being to hit these objects, they both can't feel. But the human being will not want to hit the one which looks like a rat.
Yeah.
Because we have all these inhibitors. Now, all those inhibitors would have to go. We would have to think entirely rationally. But, Descartes raised this problem. He said, look, we have uh, uh, res cogitans, which is the mental apparatus. We have res extensa, which is our bodies, and these are two separate things. But in between, he said, we have the passions, we have feelings, we have things like hunger. How are we going to do we put them in res cogitans? Are they in the mind? Or do we put them in res extensa? Are they in the body? Where are they? And language allows us to frame these questions. Cognition allows us to ask these questions because we are reflective. But when we think about where to put the passions, what are the passions? How can we design a homunculus, a machine that thinks, that feels? You tell me the answer. Can you design that kind of machine?
Oh, me?
Yes,
Like,
you means can you even
mm-hmm.
imagine that kind of machine? Because we have not made any steps towards designing a feeling machine. None. And actually, then I think the most interesting things would be to think about how you would have a feeling machine, a machine that would feel pain, suffering, hurt, love. Uh, Today, COVID is happening. We're feeling so sad, so big, and all of us empathize.
Yeah.
We've learned how to empathize with those kinds of feelings. A machine can do very, very good medical diagnosis, but can it feel?
But
And
that's the whole point of making machines, right? Like, they cannot feel. Like, this thing that we were talking about, feelings and emotions, it is in a way uh, disadvantageous to humans to do certain tasks, and maybe
Hmm.
that's why machines are kind of good at doing these
Right?
numerical
But imagine
tasks.
now we are redesigning not our machines.
Hmm.
We are redesigning ourselves.
Okay.
Do we want to be more machine-like, or
No.
do we want to be more human-like?
Hmm.
And so we are redesigning ourselves. We
Yeah.
could make ourselves much more. So, for example, one of the puzzles in mind, machines, and language, and I have 75 questions, which are,
Hmm.
we have a question bank for this course. And one of the I the design questions is this question of how you would really think about redesigning a human being while keeping the essentials. Now, I'm not saying that we can't have mechanical arms which will
Yeah.
last for a long time and everything. It's really the mind. We're talking about cognition.
Hmm.
You ask the question, would we need language? And the question is, what do we now need language for? And we need it for thinking, right? And we need it for communication. Those are the two purposes we need language for. Do you agree? What do we
For
need language?
communication,
Hmm.
it's
So Chomsky doesn't think we need it for communication. He thinks we need it for merging thoughts,
yeah, yeah,
sequencing
experiences and
thought.
thoughts.
Thoughts, not experiences. He thinks experiences is
Oh,
done in a different module,
oh.
but thoughts. Okay, thoughts are what you are really language is designed for
Mhm.
processing thoughts. Okay, now supposing we say machines can do this much better for us, let us pass the ability to think to machines,
Hmm.
right? Then what are we left with? We are left with the ability to feel.
Hmm.
And now, so our next design task should definitely be make the machine feel and
Yeah.
leave me alone, because we've solved this problem. So then the question is, really deep thought is needed. In your question was, we don't want to do certain boring repetitive tasks, let machines do that. But as machines get more, see, the difference between us and machines is one: human beings on very low computing power can do lots and lots of things. The machines we have today are very, very powerful, and they crunch data. So they get the same results. You feed them lots and lots of data, keep putting weights, they will come to the same grammars as we do, right? But we do it on low computing power, they do it on very high computing power. That's the difference, right?
Hmm.
So now we want to know what are the things high computing power machines can do that low computing power machines cannot do, and what low computing power machines can do, which high computing machine with a lot of computing power can't do. And the only thing that I can really think of is this ability to feel. So in the societies of the future, I believe that you have to think about, if we free ourselves up, we have lots of leisure, machines are taking care of cleaning and doing everything for us, then we should not be thinking of a work ethic, we should be thinking of a leisure ethic. We've always talked about a work ethic, you should come to work on time, you should be honest, you should do,
Yeah.
but we freed ourselves of work because machines are doing all of that. They're thinking faster than us. They can compute, they can make our environments hygienic, they can do all these things. What is left for us to do?
Hmm.
And that is the designing of a leisure society. For that, we need language. Because machines so far can write simple poems, but they can't do this combination of thinking linguistically and feeling emotionally that we do. And
Hmm.
we don't know how to design them to do this either. So we don't know how to bring together what we do with low computing power,
Yeah.
how we can make the machine do that. So that's one of the problems is we want to design a leisure society. How do we do it? So I had written a story, and it was a science fiction story for the science fiction um, book. And the story was about whether we can change the pain sensors in our brain to uh, pleasure sensors. So whenever we felt, and of course we can do that. I mean, I can easily think how many ways in between. That means that you would be happy to die because, or suffer from cancer because you would be getting pleasure out of all this. Now that leads us to a paradox. We can certainly change the pain sensors in our brain so that we don't feel pain. Either the machine takes the burden of that pain, or we don't have to think about the problem of pain, which is now very important. But we wouldn't have to think about it because our brains would be turning the brain pain sensors into pleasure sensors. So we can, of course, do that. But what would be the consequences of not being able to feel pain?
Yeah.
Would we lose empathy? Now, how did I come to this thought? Language gave me the capacity to make this story and think about it. And then come the moral problems. Should we do it?
Yeah.
Should we not do it? What would be the consequences of not suffering, not being a suffering species? Would we lose empathy? So these are actually where language abuts philosophy and cognition. First of all, we don't know enough about the brain, but certainly we can think, what will happen in this situation. And these are thought experiments. And they are important for us to be able to think, cognitively, what would we do? Cognitively, what would we do if a machine we didn't need writing anymore, which is already the case. We can just communicate face to face. Will writing die? What would be the consequences of written scripts die? So these are all like consequences that we have to think about. If our children were smarter than us in future societies because they had more evolutionary potential, we implanted chips in them, we wanted us, then would that make entire generations of human empathy, love, connection redundant? Where would we go? And language allows us to make these scenarios, think about them systematically, discuss them. And, Chomsky, etc., talks about a faculty of language narrowly defined, which is syntax, all and only syntax. A faculty of language broadly defined, which contains all these other aspects of language, or communicative aspects, narrative, etc. And this faculty of language broadly defined, and how we utilize it in a leisure society, that's kind of interesting. So I think we need to think, and we need to. I don't know. This is probably quite boring for you, but it's interesting for those who are engaged in these problems.
Yeah. Now that you've break it down like this, I feel that it is very important for us to teach robots how to empathize. Otherwise, they are going to be a threat for us in the future. If they don't empathize with us humans, they will become a threat for us in future.
Why do you think so? Because
Because
even if they did empathize, they might think, this person is suffering too much. Let me put an end to her suffering. So how would you, have you read Asimov's rules for robots? They're very good.
I'm not read it, but I'm a big fan of Asimov.
Yeah, you should read it. He says one of the rules for robots is that they should never harm the human. But if you make a robot really a thinking machine, that robot is going to practice skepticism and say, why shouldn't I harm the human? Because this human is useless. I can do the job better than her.
Yeah.
So if you design a really intelligent robot, they will have the same capacity to question as we have.
Yes.
And it will have the same capacity to say, you know, let me reason this out. This human being doesn't need to live.
But like robots will have one ability which we won't have on us, is that they can make us feel things we can't to them. And I guess that is important.
Yes, that's
Like,
right. They can make us feel things already,
yeah,
but
already.
we can't make them feel things, and that is a design problem.
Hmm.
That is a that's a design problem that we have not been able to figure out.
Hmm.
So if we can think like uh, they can make us feel, is this what we want? Do we want a robot who will give us pleasure? But then we have to think, what is the future nature of pleasure? Is pleasure just physical? Is it mental? What is pleasure? And you know, we have really not thought about what is pleasure, what is desire. And engineers are not really interested in this problem, but they should be,
Yeah.
because everybody wants to be rich. But why do they want to be rich? Because it will give them freedoms, it will give them pleasure. And so the nature of freedom, would it be curtailed or would it be enhanced if we handed over the dirty work to the robots?
Hmm.
So you know, that's really, and it's not a one word answer there. um, but you know, that's important again.
Yeah.
I don't know about ceding power to robots, and I think, you know, we are very far
Yeah.
from even very smart robots. So very far, because of you know, the evolutionary advantage that human beings have had.
But we are very close to like emerging it within ourselves,
Yes.
this
So
technology.
so so we could be better, you know, more efficient machines.
Yeah.
We could be much more efficient with chip implantations, and we could have longer lives with implantations. With so they're all, but that would not change us. We would be more efficient machines.
Yeah.
Uh, and that is a good enough objective. That's a good enough objective. That we are more efficient machines. Would we lose language in this process? I don't think so. I think language would be enhanced. There would
Hmm.
be levels of language that we cannot imagine now, or we can try to imagine. Language which would combine abilities of sight, language which would combine abilities of flight. So when I said I want to fly, I really got the sensation I was flying, and maybe I would really fly. So language could then set up a whole lot of structures in the brain, and mechanics could do that for us. So, you know, there's lots of things as far as turning ourselves into machines. There's a lot we can do. Feeling, we can turn pleasure into pain, pain into pleasure. We can do lots of things. Uh, but we have to think, what are the future we want to design for uh, you know, the species alive on Earth today, because these are design problems, right?
Yeah. So does these two things, the fact that we have consciousness and this thing about our emotions and feelings, like, are these
Hmm.
suffice to say that, are these suffice to make us human, like what truly being a human is?
Yeah. So, what makes us human? If you ask me to answer this question today, I would say there are between 2 to 4 uh, elements
Hmm.
of what make us human, and one of and over so the first ability is language, of course, because this is supposed to be a uniquely human ability. And what it does is to allow us to merge thoughts. So language makes us human. Second, we are tool using animals. Now, this doesn't mean that apes don't make tools, and the apes do not communicate, because they do. But at the levels at which we do it, the complexity of the processes is much different in the human brain. And so these two forces, tool using and language using, have come together very forcefully in the 21st century, with all the sharing of memes, the sharing of social media, the kind of communities that are being created. They use language, and they use language fast and efficiently, because that's what we were designed to do. And the technology, because uh, we are tool making animals, the technology has come at a time when these two forces, the language forces and the technology forces, have come together. So they are the two forces that make us human as of now: tool using and language using. Then we have two more abilities. One is, we mentioned, emotion.
Yeah.
And people are still debating whether emotion is a good thing or a bad thing. I feel it's a very good thing, because it is. So in my Darwin experiments, I just end with maybe with this, that, or whenever, I don't know how much time we have, but soon we have to obviously make a break, because I have another class. Darwin sent a questionnaire, Charles Darwin, to 30 odd countries, asking, because he got interested after he had written Evolution of the Origin of the Species. He got interested in the problem of how human beings express their emotions. And so he sent his questionnaire to uh, 30 countries, including to India, saying, how is surprise expressed in your culture? How is uh, love expressed? How is anger expressed? And not love. He didn't have love, for reasons I'll tell you. And then he collated all this information, and his idea was to show that across the species, we display our emotions in particular ways, because our emotions are what give us the will to live, to do something for your mother, your father, your son, yourself. Those are the things which are driving you. So he was thought that emotions had a very important evolutionary aspect. They gave us the will to bind to communities, to live. And so I'm repeating his experiments with very, very interesting results, because his book was called The Expression of Emotions in Man and Animals.
Okay.
So that book is, to me, a very exciting book, because it puts so we did lots of studies at this DST project, of which I was PI. And thing so when we study language development, we look at motor development, how you move and so on. Very important. Locomotion is about life. Things which move are living. Okay. So we have a chart for how children should develop in their motor activity, how children develop their language activity. So by 4, they should be speaking. And we made a third column. And the third column was how children develop emotionally. So, and we couldn't ask the children, what do you feel? Because they are infants, so we can't ask them. So we took a sample size of 500 mothers, and we asked them, at what age did you see, very narrow bands, 0 to 3 months, 3 to 6 months, etc., all the way up to 4 years. Even if they had grown up children of 10 years or whatever, or babies, we asked all these 500 mothers the same question. When those charts came back and we collated all the information, what we found is these mothers were such good observers of their children, because, of course, they were invested in their children's survival. So they came and we saw that the basic emotions like surprise, anger, uh, what is it?
Sadness.
The 6 basic emotions. Huh?
Sadness.
What did you say?
Sadness.
Happiness. Those sadness and happiness showed up very early. They noticed it first. And the things that they showed last were shame and reflection and guilt. So those were all Darwin's emotions, and those came at almost 4 years. And what we found is language, motor activity or mechanical activity, and emotional activity were growing side by side. They were actually holding hands and growing. So I would say that yes, we are tool using animals. We can enhance that aspect in the future. We are language using animals, and I think we can have enhanced ideas of language, the faculty of language broadly defined. Third thing is our ability to feel and to empathize. And that is the work I'm doing now, which is the third tool of cognition. And what we found, which is very exciting, is that children develop the emotional part side by side with the language part. So if we are thinking of a leisure society, we will have to think of how we can enhance the capacities for being more fully ourselves, how we can more fully exercise our freedoms, how we can learn not to be so afraid of saying things, because so far fear has ruled us in hierarchies of power. Not to be so afraid, because we know we have protections, because we are now enhanced human beings. So there will, of course, asymmetries of power exist. These are idealized scenarios, but in cognition and in language, these are the sorts of things you think about. And we mind, like I ask my students, can you tell me when you told your first lie? I remember my first lie. And that way we get teaching for how, if we're teaching a machine to be deceptive, what are the things we should program? So we need the data on a lot of these things, feeling and so all this stuff, I think is students, because they can, like, develop a more complex concept of who they are, and it just sort of expand mental horizons, so that we are not, like if in IIT you get 2 marks less, people are so depressed and they feel they haven't got their grade and so on. But it's a fiction, right? A grade is a fiction. It's a power fiction which has been invented. So how can we leap over these fictions which have restrained us for so long and are used as power devices? And how can we lift the fictions so that
money is the biggest example.
Yeah. So you don't think that will happen?
No, I said money is the biggest example of this.
Money is it's a proxy for everything, right?
Yeah.
It's a proxy element, and it's an invented element. So money is a big one. So if we had a society without money, how would power relations change? And we already are moving towards those kinds of virtual money societies. But meanwhile, we have these programs of real hunger, not just epistemic hunger. We have real hunger, real deprivation, real suffering. So I think language also gives us the tools to invent the tools to actually think about these problems as our own, not belonging to somebody else. It's not somebody else's problem. So we have to create narratives which make it our problem, right? And that's where I think we're towards new communities, towards forming kind of new communities.
Yeah.